not sugarcoat it, really that fire with that intensity and all those things, alignment, had that fire happened, 17 miles south, it would have impacted the city of Boulder fairly catastrophically. We have, lots of plans in place, and we have wildfire specific, operators that are hired to help address that risk and respond to that. And, 7 stations and 8 pieces of apparatus that are all here, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to help respond to that. But, Mike Tyson, famous for saying everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. In that particular instance, I think that's kind of what would happen. We would initiate some of our structure protection plans, leverage off the fuels treatments that we've done in conjunction with open space, and try to, slow fire spread and keep it out of the city proper. But given that fuel and topography and wind alignment, we could have had ourselves a pretty rough go on that one. So I'm gonna push it kind of to Jamie here, because I know he's got a couple of graphics he can show to everybody.
And while Jamie's loading up those graphics for you guys, we do get fires in Boulder, in the places that we don't want them. And we were very successful in putting them out. In fact, to the point that you guys don't even know about it. So Jamie's coming with these pictures now.
Yep, so this is a real crude simulation that I built just based on the fire progression of the Cowwood fire the first day. Aaron and I were part of the initial and extended attack of that fire. So it made a run that was approximately 5 miles and change from the point of origin to Highway 36, where it, in wind driven and receptive fuels, slopped over that fairly major highway, and then was picked up in the grass on the other side. So if we were to imagine a fire start north of Gross Reservoir, kind of in the Lakeshore Drive area here, and with similar conditions that we experience for both the Cowwood and left-hand fires, we could expect that it would have done, had similar fire behavior and made a similar run and had a major impact on the city. So let me pivot to another slide here that shows, simulates what that 60-acre slop over the area that the fire progressed over Highway 36 would have looked like. Doesn't look like it wants me to do that right now. Here we go. This is what I was looking for. So this is a little over 40 acres. And again, with our, kind of scenario simulation there of that fire starting north of Gross Reservoir, and that the area that it slopped over, a much more major control feature, as we would refer to it as Highway 36. This is a similar footprint. And what's
I think we're not seeing the slide you think you're showing.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yep.
My apologies. Let's stop sharing my screen for a moment here, and I'll try and find that photo. The point being is that we're talking about a very different fuel array than we experienced on the east side of 36, sort of in the plains. And we're talking about a very densely populated area. Let's see if this will come up. Or is everyone seeing a photo of the western side of the city in the area of NCAR? Okay.
Yes.
Great. Thanks for letting me know that didn't come up right away. So yeah, this is an approximate size of the same, again, slop over or fire progression on the other side of the control feature. And this is a scenario that we trained for, both protecting this area, which is we refer to in our structure protection plan as a good, already in place control feature that we could either use a firing operation or other structure protection tactics to keep fire on the western side of this control feature. Once it's into this area and continues to move in the same rate that the fire did in the open vegetation, it becomes a much more dire problem, obviously, from a life safety and property protection standpoint, and also from a fire control standpoint, that we're talking about much larger flame lengths, more ember production, and more probability that it could continue to progress. And this is also a scenario that we've trained for and have a plan for, but it's certainly one that we want to avoid. And I think that's a good segue, while we have this up, to, what homeowners can do to prepare for wildfire.
Before you go to that, Jamie, can either Chris or one of you talk about the different way you treat a boundary that has grass like that versus one that has forested areas, like some places south of there and north of there?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. So the real driver behind fire behavior is fuels. And we're speaking of fuels, we're talking about anything that can burn. So if you think about Jamie's slide just there that he showed, and on the east side of that Mesa Trail, that connector, is grass. We can usually be very effective even in high winds if we could get in front and get fire on the ground to create a burnout operation to limit the fire spread as it comes from the oncoming direction. So grass is very good for that. Now timber, it can be just as good, but what we've seen over the years of fuels accumulation is those latter fuels allow fire to transition from grass that's still carrying the fire, pine needles and all the stuff on the ground, into the canopies. Once fire is in the canopy, then that density of the canopy becomes an issue, especially in wind-driven fires, as well as, and Jamie referenced it, ember production. The pine needles and all the things that get burned off and then are lofted into the air and then carry through the air while still holding heat, where those land becomes an issue. So grass is far less prone to spot fires. It does happen, as opposed to spot fires really becoming an issue with the timber fuel model. And I think Kirk had a question in there that kind of asked and related to the Waldo Canyon fire. And so hopefully that little discussion that we just had that Jamie showed the picture of is, yes, we do, we kind of exist for the potential of the Waldo Canyon fire happening in Boulder. So that's really what we're evaluating as a devastating fire that did come into the urban interface hard and fast and had some real problems. And we really do face the same issue here in Boulder.
Chris, did you want to add anything else before Jamie goes on?
No, I think that was good. I think we'll talk a little bit more about fuel type and what fuels look like here in a minute.
Okay, Jamie, what about on the homeowner's side of the fence then?
So there's really three priority messages that we ask everyone to do. The first one is to sign up for emergency notifications. So we have an excellent emergency notification system within the city and county. It's the same system. And we preloaded Nate with the link. I wonder if either Nate could put that up or Brian or Aaron and I could put that up. So if you haven't signed up for emergency notifications, please do. The second step is to prepare your home and property. And I know there were some questions in the survey for those that were able to answer those about what you've done so far and what some of the limitations are. So creating defensible space around your home and preparing your property is the next most important thing. And we have more information to present about that if that's where the discussion goes, or we can provide some reference materials. And then the third priority is to create a family disaster plan so that if and when we are presented with this situation in the city, that you have a plan and you can execute it quickly. We know that a lot of the residents that were affected by the Cowwood fire had very little time And I'm sure those that had plans in place were grateful that they had their checklist and could go through those actions quickly. So we'll get some more information into the chat as far as links for emergency notification and reference materials for preparing your home and property.
And there was also a comment in the chat earlier on from Eric Cornell, who said, I live 3 blocks from in the western edge of the town, and I feel like I live in town and not in the mountains. Do I need to worry about fire risk reduction on my property? The answer is yes. At 3 blocks from the edge, if we had the wind-driven fire like we saw with Calwood, I mean, really, there's scenarios that could move a fire really far into the city under the worst case scenario. So we all need to be cognizant of, you're hardening your home to wildfire, and really, as you think about that ember production, right? If trees are burning 3 blocks from your house and they're blowing embers half a mile or a mile, there's ignition points all over the place in that pathway. So yeah, there's a lot to be done, and we need to really start thinking about it that way too. And if you look at some of the fires of California that really just turned into urban conflagrations, started from wildland fires, that's kind of scary to think about. However, we don't have the sustained Santa Ana winds like California does, and we don't have the chaparral fuel model, which is really bad for fire spread too. But we've got our own little issues to deal with.
Great. And I can see now that in the chat window, Nate has posted the link for the wildfire preparedness guide. I would also like to let all of you know that within the next week, we will be sending out an email to all of you that includes all of these resource links, as well as the link to the video of this session. So that will be coming to everybody. How about somebody from the fire department talking about the assessment of homeowners' mitigations needs that the fire department provides?
Yeah, we just had a great question pop up about professional services available to assess mitigation needs. So the City of Boulder Fire Department offers what's called the detailed wildfire home assessment. So one of the specialists from the Wildland Division will come to your home and we'll go through a full assessment of your home and property and generate a report that will help you prioritize what actions need to be taken and get you started down the path to having your home the best prepared possible. So well prepared that the goal is to have your home so well prepared that no structure protection actions are needed, that we can focus on just keeping the fire out of and away from the city, and your home is standalone and ready to go. And we'll put a link up for an email address and a link to sign up for that service right now. That service is on hold currently because of the pandemic, but we're certainly are going to resume that service as soon as possible. And you can still put in a request to have that detailed home assessment, and we'll get to those requests in the order that we receive them. So we encourage you to continue to put in those requests, and we'll stay in touch with you and conduct those surveys as soon as possible. We also are conducting a curbside home assessment of all homes that are on the western side of the city that are immediately next to the wildland urban interface, and we're about a third of a way complete in that project, and that the data from that project can also be viewed on the fire department website, and we'll get a link up there for that.
And the other thing that I want to say, just as a regular homeowner, is that the preparedness guide really does a great job of pointing to many of the things that Aaron and Jamie have mentioned. So I encourage any of you who have not already used that to take a look at that. In the meantime, Chris, I'd like to, let me go a step back. Nate thinks that he has fixed the problems with the survey, and he has posted the link in the chat box. So if you would click on that link, go back to the survey and answer the 4 short questions, and then hit the submit button that now appears at the bottom of it. That should work well. And we'd really appreciate your doing that, because it'll give us some information about where you folks are coming from and what you already know about. In the meantime, Chris, there have been several questions about drinking water and how forests protect drinking water supplies. And also questions about sediments and sediment traps and stream sedimentation from runoff following a fire from the forests. So I don't know which of those questions you want to bite off and chew, but it's a whole array of questions that have to do with the nature of the forest's role in protecting water resources and what happens after a burn and the impact on water resources.
Yeah, so that's probably a big one, and probably more time than we have to dive too deep into it. But I think, I think in very simple terms, in a lot of cases, the trees hold the dirt where it's supposed to be. And when you have these big, intense fires that remove the trees and the tree cover, you have, you run the risk of dirt ending up where you don't want it, maybe in creeks or, water supplies and that kind of thing. And we certainly have those considerations when you think about, Costler Reservoir, Batasso Water Treatment Plant, or Boulder Creek or South Boulder Creek, or some of these areas that could really be impacted by a large scale fire. So, from a mitigation standpoint, there's kind of the before a fire actions, the, addressing forest health and tree density and, targeting forest conditions that would hopefully not burn quite as intensely as if you were to not treat the area. And then there's kind of the post-fire response. What do we do if there is a fire in, a high intensity fire in one of these key areas? So one thing the city has done, the City Utilities Department has worked with researchers from CSU to develop a kind of a hazard risk assessment tool that'll account for slope and aspect and soil type. And if you had a high intensity fire, it would generate a map very similar to what Stefan was showing for the Calwood fire, and identify those areas on the landscape that would really be impacted and really run the risk of erosion. So that can help us target where we would do restoration or planting or seeding or some of those tools that we could use to kind of stabilize the soil in event of a wildfire. So it's kind of this multi-tiered approach to pre-fire mitigation and then post-fire planning and response.
Chris, while we have you in front of us, can you talk a little bit about the types of trees that are flammable and what you do to reduce the wildfire risk from the trees in the forest as opposed to the trees on city streets and in people's yards?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good, there's a good difference there to kind of understand. And I think, the forests that when you're out hiking on the Mesa Trail or something, the ones that you're experiencing out in the open space areas are fire adapted ponderosa pine forests, so they historically burned relatively frequently every 15 to 30 years. When you compare that to species like the oaks and maples and green ash that you see in town, those types of that kind of the deciduous forest cover, the fire risk in those areas is much lower. You have much higher fuel moistures, you have larger leaf surface areas, they don't burn quite the same way as the coniferous pondos and Doug firs that we have kind of in the open areas. So as far as mitigation goes, it's really about, you know, kind of creating spacing within the trees. You're not going to make any of these areas fireproof. You know, you're not going to completely eliminate the risk, but by taking some of the areas out, by creating meadows on the landscape, you can change kind of how those areas burn from a high intensity fire that's jumping from treetop to treetop versus kind of a lower intensity fire that's just burning in the grass and on the ground, and gives us a little bit more of a hope of kind of getting in front of it when it does burn. So mitigation is really focused on kind of adjusting the structure within the forest.
So the mitigation within the forest itself is to space the ponderosa trees out more to reduce the burning from tree to tree.
Yep.
And that's the kind of mitigation that's been, or treatment that's been done to the ponderosa forest, for instance, on the west side of Shanahan. In forested areas that are further north in the city, on the west boundary of the city, are there areas there that still need to have that kind of treatment?
Yeah, I think we're always doing forest work, and I think we always will be. There's kind of a maintenance component to it. You know, Shanahan is a good example because we've done a lot of work there. We've also done work in the Enchanted Mesa area, Flagstaff Road corridor, kind of up and down kind of the western boundary of city open space. You know, as you move your way north, there's kind of a shift in that fuel type, and a little bit of what Aaron was talking about as far as you know, less tree cover directly adjacent to town and more grass cover. So, you know, our strategies change within that as the fuel types change. You know, if there was a fire kind of in the Wonderland area or some of those areas that are more dominated by grass, our response might be, you know, showing up with a mower or weed whips, or even burning off some of those areas to kind of address the grassland fuels. There's obviously less tree thinning to do, but there's, you know, kind of a shift in strategy as those fuel types change a little bit.
And if there were a fire threat, then I assume there would be a backfire, for instance, in a Wonderland Lake area, grassy area, to backfire and burn the fuels, the grasses back and prevent the fire from moving forward, correct?
Yeah, that would ideally be what we'd want to do. Again, timing is everything. So when you think about Calwood, what a great example of a fire 2, 3, 4 miles away, and it still got across Highway 36. So yeah, ideally, tactically, that's the situation we would find ourselves in. Wonderland Hill has the that terrain feature that acts as a good fire break and a place we can burn off of. But if the fire is moving too fast, we always go in these 3 priorities. It's life, and so life is the citizens, you guys, firefighters, their safety, and then property. So we want it's about evacuations, life preservation, and then we go into firefighting. So that's kind of the 3 phases we go through: is life, property, and then eventually hope to get to incident stabilization. Sometimes it takes a while.
And we've had a couple questions too about things that could contribute to fire spread within the city of Boulder. So historic structures on Mapleton Hill, Chautauqua Park. And there was a question about should all coniferous trees in the city be removed? So if you could talk about fire spread from the outside toward the inside of the city, that would be great.
I think one of the things you would look at most would be the urban conflagration fires in Southern California, where, like I said early on, was that fire burns fuel, and fuel is anything that can burn. And so as a wind-driven wildfire moves into a city, homes and structures become fuel. And stopping it really is a matter of when the wind stops, because as a home burns, it emits embers, it produces flame lengths, it produces radiant heat that then can spread to the next structure, and on and on and on. So really, what can we do? You know, it's like life is a balance. Firefighting is a balance. People move to these beautiful areas so that they can be in and amongst the trees, and you don't build your home out of it's a big concrete box that has no chance of burning. So it's really finding that balance. No, we don't need to remove all the coniferous trees from the city streets or even from against your houses, but there are mitigating things we can do to space them out enough, or to limit the ladder fuels underneath them so that they don't go up in flames if there were to be a moving wildland fire. As for, you know, Chautauqua, we think about that one too. So the nice thing Chautauqua has is, again, there's a feature, the road that goes behind Chautauqua up to Bluebell Shelter is another firefighting defense feature that we could make a stand on before the fire were to spread into there. But yeah, it's hard. You guys are asking great questions.
And to follow up on that one, Aaron, I think one of the common misconceptions that we hear sometimes during the detailed home assessments are, oh, you're going to make me cut all my trees. We're not. What we're going to look for are opportunities to eliminate the fuse of the tree burning that's going to burn your house down. We want to keep as many trees as we can, especially the high value trees, whether they have sentimental value or shade or privacy. We want to work with you to keep as many of those trees as possible while still eliminating the fire risk. And also for the detailed home assessment, it's a completely voluntary, you know, recommendation. It's only that, so there's no code enforcement aspect to it or anything like that. It's purely recommendations.
Okay, thank you to all of you who have taken the time to fill out the survey. More questions? Chris, can you just say briefly what is meant by treatment of the ponderosa forests? Give some concrete examples of what treatment of the forests means.
Sure. So treatment can mean a lot of things, you know, everything from thinning out ladder fuels. So basically kind of the small trees that are going to move a fire up into the bigger trees, like a ladder. So addressing ladder fuels, like I said, kind of addressing tree spacing and looking for gaps within, you know, kind of creating a patchy, clumpy landscape, you know, kind of structure on the landscape. So, you know, how the fuels are kind of organized out there, how many fuels there are. The other thing too, you know, that we try to use is prescribed fire. That's a way to address kind of the finer fuels. So the needles and the grasses underneath the trees. So, you know, kind of a variety of techniques for changing structure, changing fuel load, changing fuel density, and just changing kind of how things are organized on the landscape and how fuels are, you know, kind of organized across the forest.
Thanks. Aaron or Jamie, can you speak a little bit about people who live in East Boulder and whether they need to take the same precautions that you've outlined for West Boulder residents?
Yeah, I was actually just about to type back to that one, but then the questions keep coming in. So yes, in general, the folks in East Boulder are a bit safer. From really the scenario that we look at would be the approaching wildfire from the west coming out of the mountains, just like the Calwood fire did. So East Boulder definitely a bit safer, but there are still pockets within the city that are adjacent to little open space areas or highly grassy or shrub. So there's little mini spots within. We can't stop every possible or prepare for every situation. I mean, you might have lightning, and actually there was a structure fire 2 years ago from lightning that lit a house on fire. So there may be a day where lightning strikes a tree in my yard, and I live in Longmont, and all of a sudden I'm putting out fire in my lawn. So yeah, those are just East Boulder from the scenario that we plan for is a bit safer.
The Shanahan 4 Homeowners Association has really worked intensively on this for the last couple of years, attempting to reduce the wildfire risk for their neighborhood by working together as a neighborhood association. And I believe Jerry's on the call. Jerry, can you unmute yourself and just for a minute or two describe the kinds of things that you and your neighbors have done together to reduce wildfire risk in Shanahan 4?
Sure. We work pretty extensively with Aaron and Jamie and others from Boulder Fire Rescue. And we did not only the neighborhood assessments, the street drive-by assessments. Many of us in the neighborhood have done individual property assessments, which I highly recommend. But we also did essentially a neighborhood individual assessment to look at our homeowners common area, homeowners association common area, to see what was appropriate here. And we've been through several phases of that now, and we're about to embark on our third and perhaps final phase, other than maintenance kind of work. Initially, we limbed up a lot of our evergreens, and then at the appropriate time of year, as the fuels are starting to cure, we weed whack the native grasses around them to create fire separation such that wind-driven flame lengths would not get into the lower branches of the evergreens, similar to what Chris has been describing as the mitigation work further up on the mesa, further up Shanahan Ridge. We've also removed a number of junipers because they're particularly flammable. Junipers and a few pinyon pines, which are also highly flammable, from the common areas. And we're about to get into our parking areas. We are in the process of getting bids right now to have that work done here probably shortly after the first of the year, to remove those potential fuel sources. And it's really taking the junipers out from under the ponderosas in our parking islands to eliminate those latter fuels. So collectively, I think all of those things have gone a good measure towards reducing the potential risk on our HOA common areas. And then, of course, individual homeowners have taken varying levels of preparations, some of whom have completely eliminated plantings adjacent to their homes and put in gravel beds. We have not gone that far on our own property, but we've done mitigation, changed out mulch, screened off areas under porches and things like that to reduce the potential impact of blowing embers. And we've also tried to think about access for the fire department into the neighborhood. Part of the reason we're working on mitigation in our parking islands is that it's one less potential torch when Boulder Fire Rescue is trying to come into the neighborhood to deal with a fire that's approaching. So those are some of the things we've done. And as I say, it's an ongoing effort. And we have worked very closely with Jamie and Aaron and others at Boulder Fire Rescue.
Thanks a lot, Jerry. I think that gives everybody some real concrete examples. And if you look in the fire protection publication from the fire department, I think you'll see many of these things both visually in the illustrations and in the verbiage. Would one of you like to take on the question of how much at risk is the Wonderland Hill area, the Mapleton Hill area, the Dakota Ridge area? Who wants to take on that series of questions?
I think
Karen,
Chief
I'll take
Oliver
that one
does.
on. Yeah, I pushed that one out there, just kind of trying to keep up with these things in the chat. But, you know, Wonderland Hill, north all the way to Dakota Ridge out into the county, really is in pretty fantastic shape. There's a big field transition there. It's mostly grass. The other cool thing is there's the Wonderland Lake Trail that runs quite a ways behind the structures there that gives us plenty of opportunity to put ourselves, you know, between the fire and the homes, if you will. And then one of the coolest features when Dakota Ridge was being developed, part of the planning process, they actually involved us, the fire department, and, you know, kind of said, hey, if we're going to put this neighborhood out here, what should we do? And one of those things that we decided in the design feature was to put the road around the outside of the subdivision as opposed to the homes backing right into the fuel. So again, gives us that great defensible feature to burn out, make a stand if we need to. So those neighborhoods are actually in what I consider really good shape.
Does that mean the individual homeowners don't need to worry about any of this preparation?
No, absolutely not. It's still, you know, those embers still happen, you know, spot fires happen. You know, putting in the effort and protecting your home is just as much on the homeowner. In fact, more so on the homeowner than it is on open space or the fire department.
Great. Thanks, Brian.
Same question for Chautauqua. How much at risk?
Chautauqua's, you know, it's all of our neighborhoods in the interface are at risk. Chautauqua being where it is, you know, the fuels that kind of surround there. Again, that's you're closer to that transition. There's still more pine trees there. Defensible feature with the Bluebell Road, like Aaron mentioned earlier, but those are really old structures. So that particular, we work with Jeff there at Chautauqua quite a bit. We're working with the Chautauqua Association on their resiliency plan to start implementing some mitigation efforts and some other things to help better prepare Chautauqua.
Great. And Flagstaff area?
Same. We're working on that, you know, working on our assessments from the curbside to try to actually establish a good baseline level of risk. You know, that area is, you know, again, west side of city urban interface. So we've got that potential for fire spread and encroachment into those homes. And it's just important that the homeowners recognize that potential is there and put the effort in themselves. But, you know, all the neighborhoods are in some fashion at risk for that fire spread.
Great. It's good to hear that open space is working on this, and so is the fire department. But it sounds like all private homeowners also need to address it. For a full sweep of the west side of town, how about a comment or two about Mapleton Hill?
I'll take that one on because I want to address a couple of the questions specifically about some of the historic requirements for some of the building materials in those neighborhoods. So we've done quite a number of detailed home assessments in the Chautauqua cottages, and a lot of the homeowners there are finding ways to, again, best prepare their homes given the limitations of the historic preservation guidelines. So I don't anticipate that those historic guidelines are going to change because of the wildfire threat. So it's a matter of working together to figure out how we can best prepare each of those individual homes given the guidelines. And also a little bit more of a blanket statement about, you know, our approach in the work that we do in the wildland program to address specific neighborhoods. We really do consider the entire western edge of the city to be the same high threat. So like Chief Oliver mentioned, there are a couple, or the north, some of the neighborhoods and communities in the northern edge of the city have higher probability of success for stopping a fire before it gets into the city. But we really, from a risk standpoint, we really treat the entire western edge of the city the same. We know that, you know, through some modeling that there are, you know, some areas based on fuel and topography that would, you know, could see, you know, more radiant heat and more potential for embers, but we really treat the whole edge of the city the same because we don't know where the fire's going to start.
Great. Well,